A rich man ties his 2-year-old son with a thin rope at the edge of a cliff and walks away. The child screams. A white horse appears at the top of the trail and gallops toward the abyss. But first, if you love animals as much as we do, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any emotional stories. Thank you. Now let's get back to our story. The white stallion's hooves struck the rocky path with deliberate force, sending small cascades of pebbles tumbling down the steep mountainside. Astride the powerful animal sat Garrett Whitley, his weathered face set in grim determination, jaw muscles clenched tight beneath 3 days of stubble. The morning sun cast long shadows across the breathtaking landscape of Blacktail Valley. But Garrett took no pleasure in the golden light dancing through the ponderosa pines. His attention was divided between the treacherous path ahead and the small bundle secured against his chest. 2-year-old Noah Whitley rested against his father, tiny fingers occasionally grasping at the stallion's silvery mane. The boy's eyes, striking blue like his father's, darted between the passing trees and the vast sky above. He hadn't spoken since they'd left the ranch before dawn, as if sensing the gravity in his father's tense shoulders and labored breathing. Just a little. A further storm, Garrett whispered to the horse, who flicked an ear back in acknowledgement. Storm had been with the Whitley family for 7 years, a gift Garrett had purchased for his wife Emma on their wedding day. The stallion was known throughout the valley for his intelligence and unwavering loyalty, traits that Garrett was counting on more than ever this morning. They were taking Eagle's Ridge Trail, a narrow, winding path few people knew about and fewer still dared to travel. It wasn't meant for casual riders or tourists seeking Montana's beauty. The trail was a remnant from the early settler days, carved along dangerous ridgelines with sheer drops that plummeted hundreds of feet to the valley floor below. But it led to a place Garrett needed desperately, the isolated Falcon's Overlook, a natural plateau jutting from the mountainside where one could see for miles in every direction. When they finally emerged from the dense forest onto the windswept clearing, Garrett drew a deep breath. The valley stretched beneath them like a vast green and brown quilt, with the silver thread of Blacktail River winding through its center. The Whitley Ranch, 5 generations of family history, was visible in the distance, its white buildings and extensive pastures standing out against the landscape. "Here we are, little man," Garrett said, his voice catching. Carefully dismounting with Noah still secured to his chest, Garrett lowered himself to the ground. The wind whipped around them, rustling the sparse vegetation clinging to life on the exposed overlook. Storm stood vigilant, nostrils flaring, as he took in the scents carried on the mountain air. From his saddlebag, Garrett removed a length of soft rope and a thick wool blanket. With practiced hands that betrayed the trembling in his heart, he wrapped Noah in the blanket, securing it with gentle knots. The boy watched his father's movements with curious eyes. "Da?" Noah questioned, his small voice nearly lost in the wind. Garrett paused, meeting his son's gaze. For a moment, his composure threatened to crumble. "It's okay, Noah. You're going to be okay." With methodical care, he looped the rope around Noah's waist, fashioning a secure harness, then tied the other end to a sturdy juniper growing from a crevice in the rock. The arrangement would allow Noah some movement, but keep him from wandering too close to the dangerous edges. Garrett tested the knots 3 times, tugging with significant force until satisfied they would hold. "Storm will stay with you," Garrett said, running his hand along the stallion's powerful neck. "Won't you, boy?" The horse nudged Garrett's shoulder and took a protective stance near Noah, who had already begun exploring the small area his tether allowed. Garrett reached into his pocket and removed a small silver whistle on a chain, placing it around Noah's neck. "Listen to me, Noah," he said, kneeling to meet his son's eyes. "If you need help, blow this whistle. Storm knows what it means." He demonstrated with a gentle puff that produced a high, piercing sound. The stallion's ears pricked forward immediately. From his shirt pocket, Garrett withdrew a folded paper, sealed in plastic and pinned to the inside of Noah's jacket. Then he checked his watch, a heavy silver timepiece that had been his grandfather's, and glanced at the position of the sun in the sky. "I'll come back for you, Noah. I promise." His voice broke. "But if I don't, Storm will make sure someone finds you. He always knows the way home." Noah's attention had already shifted to a colorful butterfly dancing on the breeze nearby, his innocent distraction, a small mercy as Garrett backed away slowly. Storm remained stationary, his dark eyes following Garrett's movement. No command was needed. The horse understood his role as guardian. At the edge of the clearing, Garrett paused for one last look. The image of his son playing in the dappled sunlight, the majestic white stallion standing watch beside him, against the backdrop of the vast Montana wilderness, seared itself into his memory. "Take care of him," Garrett whispered, though whether to Storm, to the mountains, or to some higher power, even he couldn't say. Then he disappeared into the forest, taking a hidden deer trail that branched away from the main path. The route would eventually lead him to the old mining road on the far side of the mountain, if he could make it that far on foot. Left behind, Storm remained vigilant, occasionally lowering his head to nudge Noah gently when the boy strayed too close to the edge. Hours passed as the sun climbed higher. Noah eventually tired, curling up against Storm's forelegs and drifting into sleep, his small hand clutching the silver whistle. The temperature began to drop as afternoon shadows lengthened across the plateau. Storm grew increasingly restless, pawing at the ground and tossing his head. When Noah awoke crying with hunger and thirst, the stallion made his decision. With gentle persistence, Storm herded Noah to the juniper tree, encouraging the boy to sit in its minimal shade. Then, with a soft nicker that seemed almost like a promise, the stallion turned and galloped back down Eagle's Ridge Trail, his white coat flashing between the trees like a ghost. Meanwhile, at the sprawling Whitley Ranch below, Victoria Lancaster, known to everyone as Miss Vicky, paced the kitchen floor. As the ranch's housekeeper for over 30 years, she had practically raised Garrett after his parents' accident. Now her weathered hands wrung together as she checked the clock for the 100th time. "They should have been back hours ago for Noah's lunch," she murmured to herself. The kitchen phone rang, startling her. "Whitley Ranch," she answered, her voice strained with worry. "Miss Vicky, it's Sheriff Holloway." The familiar voice of Blacktail Valley's sheriff carried a note of urgency. "Is Garrett there? I need to speak with him immediately." "He's not, Jim. He took Noah out riding at dawn and hasn't returned. I'm getting worried sick." A heavy silence hung on the line before the sheriff spoke again. "Vicky, you need to know something. I've just received some troubling information about the custody filing. It's worse than we thought. There's a hearing scheduled for tomorrow that Garrett doesn't know about. If he misses it, they'll take Noah," Vicky finished, her voice hollow. "Those vultures from Emma's family will get custody. Yes, and there's more. I've received word that..." Whatever the sheriff had been about to say was cut off by a commotion outside. Vicky hurried to the window in time to see ranch hands pointing and running toward the main gate. There, trotting up the long driveway, was Storm, riderless, sides heaving with exertion, saddle askew. But what made Vicky's blood run cold was the absence of the small figure that should have been with the horse. "Jim," she said into the phone, her voice barely above a whisper. "Storm's back. Alone." As the ranch hands surrounded the exhausted stallion, Vicky noticed something that made her heart miss a beat. The leather strap of one stirrup had been cleanly cut, not torn or broken. And despite his obvious fatigue, Storm was not settling in as he normally would upon returning home. Instead, he pawed the ground impatiently, turning back toward the direction from which he'd come, nickering with urgency. It was then that Vicky knew. Something had happened on that mountain, and whatever it was, Storm was trying to tell them about it. The faithful horse wasn't just returning home, he was calling for help. And somewhere up in those vast, unforgiving mountains, little Noah waited with nothing but a rope and his father's promise to keep him safe. Sheriff Jim Holloway arrived at the Whitley Ranch in a cloud of dust, his weathered police cruiser skidding to a halt in the gravel driveway. The property was already abuzz with activity. Ranch hands gathering supplies, neighbors arriving on horseback and in pickup trucks, everyone converging with a single purpose: find Garrett and little Noah. The white stallion stood in the center of it all, still saddled but refusing water or rest. Miss Vicky stood beside Storm, her hand steady on his neck even as her eyes betrayed her fear. "He won't settle, Jim," she said as the sheriff approached. "I've never seen him like this. He keeps looking back toward the mountains." Sheriff Holloway examined the cut stirrup strap, rubbing the clean edge between his fingers. 25 years in law enforcement had taught him the difference between an accident and deliberate action. This was no equipment failure. "Garrett wouldn't separate from Noah willingly," the sheriff said, his voice low. "Not with everything that's happening with Emma's family." Miss Vicky nodded grimly. Since Emma's passing 6 months earlier, the Prescott family had been relentless in their attempts to gain custody of Noah. What had begun as offers of help had quickly soured into legal threats. The wealthy Boston family had never approved of their daughter marrying a Montana rancher, and now they saw their chance to bring their grandson into what they considered proper society. "The hearing is tomorrow," she whispered. "If Garrett isn't there, we'll find them before then," the sheriff promised, though the vastness of the mountains looming above them made the words feel hollow. Where would he have gone? Any places special to him and Emma? Before Miss Vicky could answer, Storm suddenly jerked his head up, ears pricked forward. The stallion gave a shrill whinny and pulled away from her grip, trotting toward the gathered search party with purpose. "I think he wants us to follow him," said Mason Turner, the ranch foreman, as Storm circled back impatiently when no one immediately moved. The sheriff hesitated only a moment. "Saddle up. 4 riders, the best you've got. The rest fan out on the usual trails. Radio contact every 30 minutes. Mason pointed to 3 experienced ranch hands. "You 3 with me. We'll follow Storm." Within minutes, the small group was mounted and ready. Storm seemed to understand, prancing eagerly at the head of the formation. The moment Mason gave him leave, the white stallion bolted toward a rarely used trail leading up into the mountains. "That's Eagle's Ridge Trail," Miss Vicky said, her voice tight with worry. "It's dangerous. Hardly anyone uses it anymore." "Why would Garrett take that route?" The sheriff frowned, watching as the riders disappeared into the tree line. "I don't know," Miss Vicky admitted, "unless he was trying to avoid being seen." As the search party followed Storm's lead, miles away on the other side of the mountain range, a group of 5 hikers was making their way along Falcons Pass. They had deviated from their planned, a route due to a washed-out bridge on Pine Creek Trail. "Are you sure this is safe, Mark?" asked Diana Chen, eyeing the narrow path skeptically. "This isn't on any of our maps." Mark Abernathy, their unofficial leader and the most experienced hiker among them, checked his GPS again. "It's an old trail, but it'll connect us back to the main route eventually. We just need to make it to Falcon's Overlook for tonight. There's a good camping spot there." What none of them expected as they rounded the final bend to the overlook was the sound of a child's cry carried on the wind. They froze, exchanging bewildered glances. "Did you hear that?" asked Lena Davis, the youngest of the group. They stood in silence until the sound came again, unmistakably a child's voice, followed by a piercing whistle that echoed across the mountainside. "There's someone up there," Mark said, shouldering. "His pack higher. Come on!" They rushed the final quarter-mile to the overlook, emerging from the forest to find a small boy sitting beneath a gnarled juniper tree. His clothes were dirty, his face tear-streaked, but he appeared physically unharmed. A rope connected him to the tree, allowing limited movement around the plateau. "Oh my God," breathed Diana, rushing forward. "Hey there, sweetie. Are you okay?" Noah looked up at the strangers with wide, frightened eyes, the silver whistle clutched in his tiny hand. "Da?" he questioned hopefully. "Where's your dad, little one?" Mark asked gently, kneeling beside the boy while Lena carefully untied the rope. "What are you doing up here all alone?" Noah's lower lip trembled. "Da, go! Storm, go!" He blew the whistle again, the sound painfully loud at close range. "Storm?" Lena asked, looking around. "Is that a person?" "Maybe a dog?" suggested Ramon Vasquez, another member of their group, as he offered Noah a water bottle. The boy drank, eagerly. "Check for ID," Mark directed. "He's too young to tell us much." Diana gently examined Noah's clothing and found the plastic-wrapped note pinned inside his jacket. She unfolded it carefully, her expression growing increasingly troubled. As she read, "Guys, this is serious," she said. "Listen to this. My son's name is Noah Whitley. If you found him alone, please take him to Sheriff Holloway in Blacktail Valley. Do not contact anyone else. His safety depends on it. They're trying to take him from me using false allegations. I had no choice but to leave him here temporarily. Storm will return for help." She turned the paper over. "There's more. Tell Vicky at the ranch to check behind the painting in my office. The evidence is there. Noah is in danger if the Prescotts get custody. I'll return when I can. Please protect my son." A heavy silence fell over the group as the implications sank in. "We need to get this child to safety and contact the authorities," Mark decided. "It'll be dark soon. We can't make it down the mountain before nightfall." "We can't stay here either," Ramon pointed out. "The temperature will drop below freezing tonight. The boy isn't equipped for it." "There's an emergency shelter 2 miles back," Lena suggested. "It's closer than continuing forward." Diana had wrapped Noah in her spare fleece jacket. The boy was watching them with solemn eyes, occasionally calling Da or Storm when he thought he heard something in the forest. "Who's Storm, sweetie?" Diana asked gently as she offered him some crackers from her pack. Noah pointed to an area near the edge of the overlook where hoofprints were visible in the soft earth. "Horse," he said simply. "White horse." The hikers exchanged glances again. "His father had a horse with him," Mark concluded. "Must have gone for help and left the boy secured here to keep him safe from the edges." "But why leave him at all?" Ramon wondered. They had no answers, only the cryptic note and a frightened toddler. With night approaching, they gathered their gear and Noah, beginning the careful journey back to the emergency shelter. Unknown to them, Storm was leading Mason and the ranch hands up the opposite side of the mountain at a punishing pace. The white stallion seemed tireless, stopping only to ensure the riders were still following before pushing onward again. "He knows exactly where he's going," Mason marveled as they navigated a particularly treacherous section of the trail. By the time they reached Falcon's Overlook, the setting sun was casting long shadows across the plateau. Storm galloped to the juniper tree, circling in obvious distress when he found only the discarded rope. The stallion pawed at the ground and trumpeted a call that echoed across the valley. "Noah was here," Mason said, examining the small footprints, "and the remains of food wrappers that hadn't been there before. Someone found him and took him." One of the ranch hands discovered the hiker's trail leading away from the overlook. "Looks like a group," he reported. 5 or 6 people. Heavy boots, hiking gear probably. "They can't have gone far," Mason decided. "Storm, can you find them? Find Noah." The stallion needed no further encouragement. With nostrils flared, he picked up the scent trail and moved with renewed purpose along the hiker's path. Meanwhile, at the Whitley Ranch, Sheriff Holloway was coordinating the expanding search effort when a call came in from the emergency services. "Dispatcher. Sheriff, we've received a satellite phone call from a Mark Abernathy." He and his hiking group have found a child matching Noah Whitley's description at Falcon's Overlook. They're taking shelter for the night and will bring him down at first light. Relief washed over the sheriff's weathered face. Thank God. Is he all right? The child is unharmed, but they found him tied to a tree with a note. Mr. Abernathy was concerned about its contents. After hearing the message relayed from the note, Sheriff Holloway's expression darkened. Tell them to stay put. I'm sending a rescue team to their location tonight. And Karen, don't log this in the system yet. Keep it between us. The dispatcher hesitated. Sir, protocol? I know the protocol, the sheriff cut in. But if what Garrett wrote is true, we need to be careful who gets this information. After ending the call, he turned to Miss Vicky. Noah's safe. Some hikers found him. The older woman sagged with relief, tears springing to her eyes. And Garrett? No sign of him yet. But there was a note. He relayed the message, watching as understanding dawned on her face. The painting in his office, she whispered. Of course. They hurried to Garrett's study, a warm room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large oak desk. Behind it hung a landscape painting of the Whitley Ranch as it had looked a generation ago. Miss Vicky carefully removed it from the wall, revealing a small wall safe. Do you know the combination? The sheriff asked. Emma's birthday, she replied without hesitation, her fingers spinning the dial with practiced ease. Inside was a manila envelope and a worn leather journal. Miss Vicky recognized it immediately. That's Emma's diary. She wrote in it every day, even when she was sick. The sheriff opened the envelope first, pulling out legal documents, bank statements, and several USB drives. These are financial records for the Prescott Family Foundation, he said, scanning the first page. And these appear to be transcripts of phone conversations. Miss Vicky had opened the diary, flipping to the final entries. Her face paled as she read. Jim, she said, her voice barely audible, Emma didn't die from complications of pneumonia like they told us. She was getting better. She writes here that she overheard her father and brother discussing medication dosages the day before she took a sudden turn for the worse. The sheriff took the diary with steady hands, reading the passage himself. She suspected they were poisoning her, he said grimly. Did she tell Garrett? The final entry says she was going to tell him that night. She never got the chance. Miss Vicky's eyes filled with tears. They killed her, Jim, and now they want Noah. Sheriff Holloway studied the documents spread across the desk, the pieces falling into place. Garrett must have been gathering evidence against them all these months. The custody hearing tomorrow was their end game. But why leave Noah on that mountain, Miss Vicky wondered. Because he knew they'd try to stop him from presenting this evidence, the sheriff realized. By leaving Noah somewhere safe but remote with Storm to bring help, he ensured the boy would be found, but not until Garrett had time to do whatever he needed to do. He wasn't abandoning his son. He was protecting him the only way he could. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they saw ranch hands running toward the driveway, where headlights cut through the gathering darkness. A battered pickup truck had arrived, and emerging from the passenger side was a figure they recognized immediately. Garrett Whitley, his clothes torn and dirty, his face haggard with exhaustion, but very much alive. Miss Vicky gasped. Thank the Lord! But the sheriff's relief quickly shifted to concern as he noticed Garrett's unsteady gait and the way the ranch hands rushed to support him. He's injured, he said, hurrying toward the door. Behind them on the desk, Emma's diary lay open, its final pages telling a story of betrayal and danger that had only begun to unfold. And somewhere in the mountains above, Storm continued his relentless search for the small boy whose safety had been entrusted to him, the silent witness to a desperate father's final loving act of protection. The emergency shelter where Mark, Abernathy's hiking group had taken refuge was little more than a sturdy cabin with basic supplies, but it provided welcome protection from the biting Montana night. Noah Whitley sat wrapped in blankets by the small wood stove, his eyes following Diana Chen as she prepared a makeshift meal from their combined provisions. "He's still not talking much," Lena whispered to Mark, who stood by the window watching the darkness settle over the mountains. "Just asks for Da and Storm occasionally." "Trauma response probably," Mark replied. "Poor kid must be confused and scared." Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the first hints of an approaching storm. The weather forecast had mentioned possible rain, but at this elevation it could easily turn to snow. Mark's satellite phone had barely connected with emergency services before losing signal again. They were effectively cut off until morning, or until help arrived. Noah suddenly perked up, his small head tilting as if listening to something beyond human perception. "Storm," he said clearly, crawling from his nest of blankets toward the door. Ramon moved quickly to intercept him. "Whoa there, little buddy, it's too cold outside." But Noah became insistent, pointing toward the door. "Storm coming." Mark exchanged glances with Diana. "He's been doing this on and off," she explained. "I think he believes the horse is coming back for him." As if in answer to Noah's declaration, a sound reached them from outside, the unmistakable whinny of a horse, followed by the muffled thuds of approaching hoofbeats. "That's impossible," breathed Lena, hurrying to join Mark at the window. Through the swirling darkness, a ghostly shape emerged, a white horse moving with purpose through the trees toward the cabin. Behind it rode 4 figures, their flashlights cutting yellow beams through the night. "It's a search party," Mark announced, relief evident in his voice. He yanked open the door, waving his flashlight to signal their position. Noah squirmed, free from Ramon's grasp, and toddled to the doorway. "Storm!" he cried, genuine joy breaking through his earlier solemnity. The white stallion reached the cabin first, pushing past Mark to thrust his head inside, nostrils flaring as he sought. Noah's scent, finding the boy, Storm lowered his great head, allowing Noah to wrap small arms around his muzzle, in a gesture of such trust and relief that the hikers fell silent, witnessing something that transcended ordinary understanding. "I'll be damned," muttered Mason Turner as he dismounted. He led us straight to him, like he knew exactly where to find the boy. Introductions were quickly made as the ranch hands crowded into the small shelter, their faces etched with equal parts exhaustion and wonder. Noah remained close to Storm, who had positioned himself half in and half out of the doorway, unwilling to move farther from the child. "The sheriff sent a larger rescue team," Mason explained, accepting a cup of coffee from Diana. "They should reach us by morning, weather permitting, but we couldn't wait, not with the storm coming in. Storm here wouldn't let us rest anyway, kept leading us onward, even after we lost daylight." Mark nodded toward Noah, who was now drowsily leaning against Storm's neck. The boy had a note pinned to his jacket, something about his father protecting him from people trying to take him away. "The Prescotts," Mason confirmed grimly. "His mother's family from Boston. They've been trying to get custody since Emma passed 6 months ago. Garrett, that's Noah's father, has been fighting them every step of the way." "The note mentioned false allegations," Diana said. "What kind of allegations?" Mason hesitated, glancing at Noah. Though the boy seemed absorbed in Storm's presence, he lowered his voice. "They're claiming Garrett is mentally unstable, that Emma's death broke him. They've paid for psychiatric evaluations that support their case, bought influence with certain officials. It's all politics and money." "And the father?" Ramon asked. The note made it sound like he was in trouble. "We don't know yet," Mason admitted, "but there's a custody hearing tomorrow. If Garrett doesn't appear, they'll likely award temporary custody to the Prescotts." Throughout the night, they took turns keeping watch and tending the fire. Storm remained at his post, occasionally nickering softly when Noah stirred in his sleep. The stallion accepted water and feed from the ranch hands, but refused to be led. Away from the cabin door. "I've never seen anything like it," Mason confided to Mark as they shared the early morning watch. "That horse has been devoted to the Whitley family since Garrett bought him for Emma, but this is something else. It's like he understands exactly what's at stake." Dawn brought clear skies and the distant sound of helicopter rotors. The rescue team arrived with medical personnel, Sheriff Holloway among them. The sheriff crouched before Noah, his weathered face softening as he spoke to the boy. "Hey there, partner. Remember me? I've got good news for you. Your daddy's waiting. And for you back at the ranch." Noah's eyes widened. Okay?" "He's okay," the sheriff confirmed. "Got some scrapes and bruises, but nothing that won't heal. He's mighty anxious to see you." As they prepared for evacuation, Storm grew agitated, circling the emergency personnel with obvious concern as they examined Noah. "He's fine, big fellow," one of the paramedics assured the horse, though her tone suggested she felt slightly foolish talking to an animal as if it understood. But when they attempted to load Noah into the helicopter without Storm, the stallion planted himself firmly in the way, refusing to be led aside. "We can't take the horse in the chopper," the pilot said, exasperated. Sheriff Holloway studied Storm's determined stance and Noah's renewed distress at the separation. After a moment's thought, he radioed back to base. "Change of plans. I'll bring the boy down on horseback with Mason's team. Send the helicopter on ahead with the hikers." "Sir," the pilot protested, "the weather report shows another system moving in by afternoon." "Then we'd better get moving," the sheriff replied simply, lifting Noah onto Storm's back. The descent was slow but steady, with Storm picking his way carefully down the mountainside, seeming to understand the precious cargo he carried. Noah rode before the sheriff, occasionally pointing out landmarks or murmuring things only he and the horse seemed to comprehend. "Da said Storm no way," he told the sheriff at one point, patting the white mane. "Storm always find home." Daddy was right about that," Sheriff Holloway agreed, watching the stallion navigate a particularly tricky section of trail with uncanny sureness. By mid-afternoon, with dark clouds gathering once more above the mountains, they emerged from the tree line within sight of the Whitley Ranch. Storm quickened his pace immediately, sensing home and the end of his mission. In the ranch house, Garrett Whitley sat by the window despite the doctor's orders to rest. His right arm was bandaged, and bruises darkened one side of his face, evidence of a violent confrontation. But his injuries were forgotten the moment he spotted the returning party. "Noah," he whispered, struggling to his feet. Miss Vicky steadied him. "Easy now. They're almost here." The moment they entered the yard, Storm broke into a canter, bringing Noah home the final stretch. Garrett managed to make it onto the porch just as they arrived, his legs nearly buckling beneath him as Sheriff Holloway lifted Noah down and set him on the ground. "Day!" Noah cried, running forward with arms outstretched. Garrett dropped to his knees, gathering his son into a fierce embrace. "I'm here, little man. I'm here. I promised I'd come back, didn't I?" Over Noah's shoulder, his eyes met Storm's. The stallion stood watching them, sides heaving from exertion but head held high. "And you," Garrett said, his voice breaking, "you did exactly what I knew you would. You saved him." That evening, as a gentle rain began to fall, bringing with it the fresh scent of pine and earth, the Whitley Ranch became a hub of activity. Sheriff Holloway had deputies stationed at the property entrances, while inside, county officials and a judge were reviewing the evidence Garrett had compiled against the Prescott family. Noah, bathed and fed, had fallen asleep on the living room sofa, exhausted from his ordeal. Garrett sat beside him, his own fatigue evident in the dark circles beneath his eyes, but unwilling to leave his son's side even for a moment. "The preliminary hearing is set for 9 a.m., the sheriff informed him quietly. "Judge Matthews has agreed to conduct it here, given the circumstances. The Prescott's lawyers are flying in tonight." They'll try to dismiss Emma's diary as the delusions of a sick woman, Garrett said, his voice tight with controlled anger. But the financial records and recorded conversations are harder to explain away. The evidence is compelling, Sheriff Holloway assured him. And we've got statements from the hospital staff who were pressured to alter Emma's medical records after her death. The state police are executing search warrants on the Prescott estate in Boston as we speak. Garrett nodded, gently stroking Noah's hair. When I overheard them discussing their plans to take Noah tomorrow, I knew I had to do something drastic. They had people watching the ranch, the town. I couldn't just run. They would have claimed I was kidnapping him. So you created a situation where Noah would be safe but eventually found, the sheriff concluded. I needed time to reach Emma's cousin in Helena, the only Prescott who ever stood against the family. She had the final piece of evidence, recordings of Richard Prescott discussing how they'd altered Emma's medication. Garrett's voice cracked. They killed my wife, Jim. They were so certain Noah would inherit Emma's trust fund that they killed her when she discovered their embezzlement. And they would have silenced you just as permanently if you'd confronted them directly, Sheriff Holloway said grimly. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Miss Vicky entered, followed by Mason. Storm won't come into the stable, Mason reported. He's standing guard outside the house, won't take feed or water unless we bring it to him there. Garrett managed a tired smile. He's appointed himself Noah's personal protector. I don't think he's going to relinquish the role anytime soon. Through the window, they could see the white stallion, a sentinel figure in the gentle rain, positioned. With a clear view of the house entrance, occasionally, he would circle the perimeter before returning to his post, alert despite 2 days without proper rest. That horse understands more than seems natural, Miss Vicky observed, her voice tinged with wonder. The way he brought help, the way he found Noah again, it's like he can reason things out. Emma always said he was special, Garrett replied softly, that he seemed to sense things before they happened. I didn't fully believe her until now. Later, that night, when the house had finally quieted, Garrett carried Noah to his bedroom. The boy stirred as he was laid in his bed, blue eyes opening drowsily. Storm, he questioned. He's right outside, keeping watch, Garrett assured him. He'll always be there for you, Noah, just like I will. Noah seemed satisfied with this answer, snuggling deeper into his blankets. Storm brave, he murmured sleepily. Da brave, too. Not as brave as you, little man, Garrett whispered, pressing a kiss to his son's forehead. From his bedroom window, he could see Storm's white form gleaming faintly in the moonlight that occasionally broke through the passing clouds. The stallion stood motionless, a silent guardian whose loyalty had transcended ordinary animal instinct to become something profound. A bond forged in crisis and sealed by unwavering trust. As Garrett watched, Storm turned his head toward the window as if sensing his gaze. Their eyes met across the distance, an unspoken understanding passing between man and horse. In that moment, Garrett knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges tomorrow's hearing might bring, they would face them together. Father, son, and the extraordinary animal that had become their family's guardian spirit. Outside, the rain continued its gentle rhythm, washing away the last traces of footprints and hoof marks from the yard, cleansing the earth in preparation for whatever new paths might be forged when morning came. Morning broke over Blacktail Valley with the clarity that often follows a night of rain, the air scrubbed clean and tinged with the scent of wet pine and sage. The Whitley Ranch stood bathed in golden light, its white buildings gleaming against the backdrop of mountains still shrouded in wisps of fog. But the peaceful scene belied the tension within. By 8:30, the ranch house's living room had been transformed into an impromptu courtroom. Judge Eleanor Matthews, a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, sat behind Garrett's desk. Court reporters and legal representatives arranged themselves on hastily gathered chairs, while deputies maintained a vigilant presence at every entrance. Garrett Whitley sat with his lawyer, Benjamin Adler, a longtime friend who had driven through the night from Billings to represent him. Across the room, 3 men in expensive suits conferred in hushed tones. Richard Prescott's legal team, dispatched from Boston on a private jet as soon as news of Garrett's return had reached them. Noah remained upstairs with Miss Vicky, shielded from the proceedings that would determine his future. Through the window, Garrett could see Storm still standing guard outside, having refused all attempts to move him to the stables. The stallion's unwavering presence provided a strange comfort, a reminder of the extraordinary events that had brought them to this point. At precisely 9 o'clock, Judge Matthews called the hearing to order. This court is convened to address emergency motions filed in the custody matter of Noah James Whitley, she announced, her voice carrying the weight of 40 years on the bench. Given the unusual circumstances and the serious nature of the allegations on both sides, I have agreed to this unprecedented venue. Richard Prescott's lead attorney, a hawkish man named Lawrence Thornton, rose immediately. Your Honor, we must object to these proceedings. Our clients were given less than 12 hours' notice. Mr. Richard Prescott and Mrs. Eleanor Prescott are en route from Boston, but have been delayed by weather. We request a postponement until they can be present. Mr. Thornton, Judge Matthews, replied, peering over her reading glasses, your emergency motion to obtain temporary custody due to Mr. Whitley's alleged abandonment of his child was scheduled for this morning at the county courthouse. You can hardly object to timing you yourself requested, albeit in a different location. Thornton adjusted his tie, momentarily flustered. We filed that motion when Mr. Whitley was missing and his child had been abandoned on a mountainside, facts that are not in dispute. The circumstances have changed. Indeed they have, Benjamin Adler interjected, rising from his seat beside Garrett. And we are prepared to demonstrate that the emergency existed not because of my client's actions, but because of the imminent threat posed to Noah Whitley by the Prescott family. Judge Matthews nodded. Proceed with opening statements, gentlemen. What followed was a methodical presentation of evidence that painted a damning picture of the Prescott family's actions. Emma's diary entries were read aloud, her growing suspicions documented in her increasingly shaky handwriting. Financial records revealed systematic embezzlement from Emma's trust fund, money that should have passed directly to Noah upon her death. Phone transcripts captured Richard Prescott discussing how to ensure Garrett would be deemed an unfit parent. Most damning were the recordings Emma's cousin had provided, conversations between Richard Prescott and a private nurse, discussing alterations to Emma's medication dosages in clinical, detached terms. Throughout the proceedings, Garrett sat, rigid, his face a mask of controlled grief and determination. Only when Emma's voice emerged from one recording, weak but resolute, as she confronted her father about the discrepancies she'd found, did his composure crack, a single tear tracking down his cheek before he steeled himself once more. By mid-morning, the atmosphere in the makeshift courtroom had shifted palpably. The Prescott's legal team grew increasingly defensive, their objections more desperate. Judge Matthews overruled them repeatedly, her expression growing grimmer with each new piece of evidence. Upstairs, Noah had grown restless, asking repeatedly for his father and for Storm. Miss Vicky did her best to distract him with books and toys, but the boy's intuitive sense that important matters were being decided below made him increasingly anxious. Want to see Storm, he insisted, pressing his face against the bedroom, a window where he could just glimpse the white stallion in the yard below. Miss Vicky hesitated, torn between keeping Noah away from the legal proceedings and acknowledging that the horse seemed to have a calming effect on the boy. Just for a few minutes, she finally agreed, but we have to be very quiet so we don't disturb the grown-ups talking downstairs. She led Noah down the back staircase and through the kitchen to a side door that opened onto the wraparound porch. Storm noticed them immediately, trotting over with ears pricked forward. Noah's whole demeanor changed as he reached out to the stallion, his small hand connecting with the velvety muzzle. He worried, Noah stated with childlike certainty, looking up at Miss Vicky. About Da? Before she could respond, a black SUV with tinted windows turned into the ranch driveway, moving too fast for the gravel surface. Storm's head came up sharply, his posture instantly alert as he positioned himself between Noah and the approaching vehicle. Inside the makeshift courtroom, the proceedings were interrupted by the sound of car doors slamming and raised voices outside. Sheriff Holloway moved to the window, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm. "It's Richard and Eleanor Prescott," he announced, his voice tight. "And they've brought private security. My deputies are intercepting them now." Judge Matthews frowned. "This court is closed to all but essential participants. Mr. Thornton, please inform your clients." But before Thornton could respond, the front door burst open. Richard Prescott strode in, a tall, imperious man in his 70s, his silver hair immaculately styled, his tailored suit unmarked by travel. Behind him came Eleanor Prescott, thin and elegant in a way that suggested rigorous discipline rather than natural grace. "What is the meaning of this farce?" Richard demanded, his Boston accent pronounced in his anger. "A custody hearing held in a ranch house? Have we descended to frontier justice in Montana?" Judge Matthews rose, her authority filling the room despite her small stature. "Mr. Prescott, you are interrupting a legal proceeding. You will take a seat or be removed." Richard's face flushed with anger, unused to being challenged. "Do you have any idea who I am? The governor of this backward state is a personal friend. This mockery of justice will not..." His tirade was cut short by a commotion from outside, shouts followed by the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. Sheriff Holloway rushed to the window again. "One of their security men is trying to grab Noah from the side porch," he reported, already moving. "Miss Vicky is blocking them, but..." Garrett was on his feet and running before the sheriff could finish, ignoring the pain from his injuries as he tore through the house toward the side entrance, the others close behind. The scene that greeted them was chaos. A burly man in a dark suit had cornered Miss Vicky and Noah against the porch railing. Two of the sheriff's deputies were struggling with another security guard by the SUV, but it was Storm who commanded attention. The white stallion had somehow leapt onto the porch and now stood with legs braced wide, his massive body forming a wall between Noah and the threat, ears pinned flat against his head in unmistakable warning. The security man froze, clearly unprepared for 1,000 pounds of angry horse. "Call off your animal," he demanded, his confidence wavering. "Storm is protecting my son from being kidnapped," Garrett replied, his voice deadly calm as he moved carefully around the stallion to reach Noah. "Sheriff, I believe this man should be arrested." Sheriff Holloway already had his weapon drawn. "On the ground, hands behind your head, now." The security man considered his options, glancing toward the SUV where his colleague was already being handcuffed. With a curse, he complied. Eleanor Prescott pushed forward, her aristocratic features contorted with frustration. "This is absurd. We're the boy's grandparents. We have every right..." "You have no rights here," Judge Matthews interrupted, having followed the commotion outside. "And based on the evidence presented this morning, you may well be facing criminal charges in the death of your daughter." Richard Prescott's face went slack with shock. "What evidence? What are you talking about?" In answer, Sheriff Holloway held up his phone. "Just received confirmation that the Massachusetts State Police executed a search warrant at your estate this morning. They found Emma's original medical records hidden in your home office safe, the ones showing she was improving before you had them altered." For the first time, uncertainty crept into Richard Prescott's expression. "That's preposterous. We loved our daughter. Everything we've done has been to protect her son from this cowboy who turned her against her family." Noah, who had been clinging to Miss Vicky's skirt, suddenly stepped forward, his small face serious as he looked up at his grandfather. "You hurt Mama," he said with the simple clarity of a child. "Storm knows, I know." A heavy silence fell over the gathered adults, broken only by Storm's soft nickering as he lowered his head to Noah's level, as if confirming the boy's statement. Eleanor Prescott stared at her grandson, then at the horse, her carefully maintained composure cracking. "Richard," she whispered, "what have you done?" The aftermath unfolded with startling swiftness. Richard and Eleanor Prescott were taken into custody pending formal charges in Massachusetts. Their security team was arrested for attempted kidnapping. Judge Matthews issued an emergency ruling granting Garrett full and permanent custody of Noah, with a restraining order against the entire Prescott family. By late afternoon, the ranch had emptied of all but those who belonged there. The Whitley family's ordeal wasn't completely over. There would be trials and testimony in the months to come, but the immediate danger had passed. Garrett sat on the porch steps with Noah beside him, watching as Storm finally accepted Mason's invitation to return to the stables for a well-deserved rest and proper care. The stallion went willingly now, looking back only once as if to ensure his charges would be safe in his absence. "Storm coming back?" Noah asked, leaning against his father's side. "Of course he is," Garrett assured him. "He's just going to get some food and rest. He's been watching over you for 2 days straight." Noah nodded, accepting this with the resilience only children possess. "He's the bravest," he declared. "The bravest," Garrett agreed, tousling his son's hair. Miss Vicky joined them, bringing mugs of hot chocolate. "That horse," she said, shaking her head in wonder. "I've never seen anything like it. The way he found Noah, the way he stood against that security man, it's almost like he understood everything that was happening." "I think he did," Garrett said quietly. "Emma always said animals sense things we don't. Truth, danger, love. Storm loved her, and he loves Noah. And you," Miss Vicky added gently. Garrett smiled, looking out across the ranch that had been his family's home for generations. "I don't know what I did to deserve such loyalty, but I'm grateful for it. When I left Noah on that mountain, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. But I knew Storm would bring help, that he would keep Noah safe until I could return." "Da knew Storm brave," Noah said, chocolate mustache forming above his smile. "Storm knew Da coming back." "That's right, little man," Garrett said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll always come back to you, always." In the days that followed, life at the Whitley Ranch began its slow return to normal. The media eventually lost interest in the story of a father's desperate gamble to protect his son. The Boston papers carried news of the Prescott's fall from grace, with financial investigations revealing decades of fraudulent activities beyond what had been done to Emma's trust. Storm resumed his regular routines, but developed new habits as well. Each morning he would wait outside Noah's window until the boy appeared, waving sleepily. Each evening, he would make a circuit of the ranch perimeter before settling in his stall for the night. And whenever Noah ventured near the corral, the stallion would materialize beside him, a constant guardian who seemed to take his role with utmost seriousness. 1 month after the events on the mountain, on a perfect autumn afternoon with the aspen trees turning gold, Garrett took Noah riding for the first time since that fateful day. With the boy securely settled before him in the saddle, he guided Storm toward a gentle trail that followed the river's winding path through Whitley land. "Where we going, Da?" Noah asked, his small hands clutching the saddle horn. "Somewhere special," Garrett answered. "Somewhere your mother loved." They rode in companionable silence, Storm picking his way carefully along the trail, as if conscious of his precious cargo. After 20 minutes, they emerged into a sunlit meadow bordered by aspen trees, their golden leaves shimmering in the light breeze. In the center stood a young oak tree, not yet fully grown. "We planted this when you were born," Garrett explained as he dismounted, lifting Noah down after him. "Your mother said it would grow along with you, getting stronger every year." Noah approached the tree solemnly, placing his small hand against its trunk. "Mama's tree." "That's right," Garrett said, kneeling beside him. "And now it's your tree too, a place you can come when you want to feel close to her." From his pocket, he withdrew a small silver medallion on a chain, the match to the one he had buried by the stream, the one that had initially confused the investigation. "This was your mother's," he explained, placing it around Noah's neck. "She wanted you to have it when you were older, but I think now is the right time." Noah examined the medallion with careful fingers, finding the small catch that opened it to reveal a tiny photograph of Emma, laughing as she held infant Noah in her arms. "That's how I want you to remember her," Garrett said softly, "happy and loving you more than anything in the world." Storm, who had been grazing nearby, approached quietly, his white coat luminous in the afternoon light. He lowered his head to Noah's level, breath warm against the boy's hair in a gesture almost like a blessing. "See?" Noah said, holding up the medallion for the horse to see. "Mama!" Storm nickered softly, and in that moment a cloud shifted above them, sending a shaft of sunlight through the aspen leaves. It illuminated the three of them, man, child, and horse, united in a moment of perfect understanding that transcended words. Later, as they rode home with the setting sun painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Noah nestled against his father's chest, the medallion safe around his neck. Storm carried them with sure, steady steps, his ears swiveling to catch every sound, his path unwavering. From the ranch house porch, Miss Vicky watched their approach, the white horse emerging from the evening shadows like a beacon, carrying the two people who had become the center of her world. Her heart swelled with gratitude for all that had been preserved, a family, a legacy, a bond between father and son that even the most determined evil had failed to break. And leading them home, as he always would, came Storm, the silent witness who had become so much more. Not magic, not human, but something extraordinary in his own right, a creature whose intelligence and loyalty had transcended the expected boundaries of his kind to become something profound and transformative. In the golden light of evening, his white coat seemed to shimmer with an inner radiance, a living symbol of protection, constancy, and unwavering faith. As they drew nearer, Miss Vicky could hear Noah's laughter carried on the breeze, the sound of a child secure in his father's arms, surrounded by love, his future stretching before him like the vast Montana sky, boundless, bright, and full of promise. And watching over it all, a white silhouette against the darkening landscape, Storm continued his eternal vigil, not just a horse, but a guardian, a hero, a friend. The silent keeper of secrets who had, in his own wordless way, saved not just a child's life, but the very heart of a family that might otherwise have been lost to shadows. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Noah and Storm touched your hearts. If you'd like to keep being moved by stories like this, subscribe to the channel, give us a like, and share in the comments what touched you the most. Here, every story is a reminder that love can conquer even the deepest darkness.